We all make mistakes. We've all been cringy middle schoolers. Nobody is perfect. Automotive design, like any art, can be challenging or even agonizing to achieve the desired result. And then some days you can just goof around and create a masterpiece. Let's reflect on some of the bizarre vehicles made by respected manufacturers. When you think of Lamborghini, you'll likely envision supercars like the Aventador or the Diablo. If you're well versed in vehicle history, perhaps you'll know that the manufacturer originally made tractors. So I guess when you combine those factors, making a V12 off-road oriented truck SUV type thing, it's really not that ridiculous. And that is exactly what Lamborghini made, and they called it the LM002. Only around 300 of these were ever built. The LM002 came standard with the exact same 5.2-liter V12 that the Countach had, producing up to 450 horsepower and nearly 370 pound-feet of torque. While these numbers are great today, this was pretty unfathomable at the time of production. You see, in the 1980s, there was an ongoing oil crisis that had began in the mid-70s, and despite it, we're still using fossil fuels, more than ever, I might add, over 40 years later. Digressing, the crisis caused nearly all automotive manufacturers worldwide to produce wimpy, boring, small, and otherwise unremarkable cars. Lamborghini didn't care. They made a 3-ton V12 brick with a 77-gallon fuel tank, 4-wheel drive, and a 5-speed manual. Even more notable, Lamborghini was ahead of its time. The SUV would not become mainstream until the advent of the Ford Explorer in the early 1990s, and trucks at this point still weren't exactly a novelty. Against all odds, Lamborghini made a legend. So what's the opposite of being a legend, you might ask? Up-badging a smart car, which is almost exactly what Aston Martin did with the Signet. It's bad enough when your buddy slaps M badges on his 328i. It's a little bit worse when a globally recognized brand does pretty much the same thing. Now, I do have to correct myself a bit. The Signet, whatever it's pronounced as, was actually based on a Toyota IQ, which is a bit larger and more refined than the smart car. However, I don't anticipate my mostly American audience to recognize the IQ because we never had it here. We had the Smart 42, aka the smart car. But anyway, it's incredibly obvious to anybody with even half a brain that Aston Martin borrowed the IQ from Toyota for the purposes of fooling the European Union into believing that they were not actively trying to suffocate the planet. Not only was Aston Martin trying to reduce average fleet emissions, they also thought it might be cheeky to try and sell elites a luxury city car. And it failed horribly. They thought they'd sell about 4,000 Signets a year, but only ended up ever producing 786 units. You can't BS the BSers. Sticking with Aston Martin, this is actually a good one, the Lagonda. Contrary to what my bashing of the Signet might make you believe, I actually do quite like Aston Martin. I love the DB7, the DB9, the Vantages, and I also really like giant sedans. So naturally, the Lagonda is right up my alley. Colloquially called the Wonder Wedge, it is powered by a 5.3-liter V8 producing 280 horsepower. I would like to remind everybody this was made during the oil crisis of the 70s and 80s, produced between the 1976 and 1990 model years. Well, actually, the first year of the Lagonda was 1974. You're right, it was. However, at that time, it was really just a 4-door version of the Aston Martin V8, and it looked like this. It wasn't its own distinct model. And they only made 7 of them. In total, less than 650 Lagondas were produced during its decade-and-a-half run. And while those aren't particularly eye-popping numbers, it did give Aston Martin great publicity, brought in a new crop of exotic customers, and ultimately kept the company from going under amidst the turnover of new ownership. Fun fact, in 2015, Aston Martin brought back the Lagonda, producing 120 ultra-luxury sedans celebrating the style and legacy of the original. Powered by a 540 horsepower 5.9-liter V12, the Lagonda Taraf, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, commanded a $1 million price tag, and that is absolutely legendary. Speaking of legendary, we're going to talk about Ferrari for a little bit, specifically the Luce. Automotive purists of the world would tell you the Luce is bizarre because it almost seems blasphemous that Ferrari would create an electric, all-wheel drive, 4-door vehicle. I don't care about that. As long as it's fast and turns, I'm not bothered. Instead, I find the Luce bizarre because it looks like the BMW i8 and a frog conceived a child that they slapped the taillights of an AutoZone AZ1 onto. I'm hoping by the time we see the production version it looks a little bit less amphibious. Legitimately, this car reminds me of what a tadpole would look like if it had 4 doors. But that's enough hating. Let's move on. Oh, you thought it was going to get better? No. Strap in, it's Nissan Murano Cross Cabriolet time. As if the Murano wasn't bad enough, Nissan thought to themselves, what if we eliminated any functional utility this thing may have had and gave it a soft top? And that's exactly what they did. For 4 model years, I might add. This thing was more successful than the Aston Martin Signet. And honestly, if it weren't for the fact that it has a CVT and pretty much no storage space, the Murano's so ugly, it's kinda cool. Nissan gave you their coveted and sneakily powerful 3.5-liter V6 that came standard with Bose audio and raw-wheel drive. On paper and without looking at it, this sounds like a good car. I'm sure to some people they are, but they're just so weird. A convertible SUV is a strange choice. Making it a soft top is an even stranger choice. But squeezing your passengers in tighter while also eliminating any possible storage space for them might be the strangest choice of all. Then again, maybe I just don't get it. I don't understand what the people want. That's what I'd say if I had no taste, but I think that I do, so we're going to move on to the next vehicle, introducing the AMC Eagle Camback, which is really just an off-road gremlin. More accurately, the Eagle Camback is based off the successor to the gremlin, the AMC Spirit, a notable vehicle in its own right. Regardless, the styling is more reminiscent of the Gremlin. Again, this vehicle was produced during the made-up oil crisis of the 70s and 80s, so performance isn't really noteworthy. What is noteworthy, however, is what AMC was doing during this time, and that is offering all-wheel drive vehicles to consumers on a mass scale. And not just offering it, the system actually worked somewhat well. Sedans, wagons, coupes, all offered with all-wheel drive. In the 1980s. AMC was at least 2 decades ahead of its time. And how did we thank them? By not buying their cars, which pretty much allowed Chrysler to purchase them for dirt cheap and then dissolve the company shortly thereafter. Unlike AMC in the 80s, GM was bailed out by the federal government in 2008, even despite their history of questionable decisions. Among the more recent ones are reviving the Blazer nameplate and making it completely flaccid, whatever the Chevy HHR was, and the next vehicle we're going to talk about, the Chevy SSR. The SSR, which stands for Super Sport Roadster, isn't necessarily a bad vehicle, it just isn't what it's supposed to be. The spiritual successor to one of the most significant nameplates of all time, El Camino, there were big shoes to fill. For 2003 and 2004, GM gave it a 300 horsepower 5.3-liter V8 and a 4-speed auto. In 2005 and 6, GM wised up and offered the same 6-liter LS V8 from the Pontiac GTO and an optional 6-speed manual, but it was already too late. Too slow to be a Corvette and not utilitarian enough to function as a truck, buyers struggled tremendously with the $40,000+ price tag when these debuted in 2003, and the upgrade to the LS in 2005 was too little too late. It's estimated that GM lost $200,000 per unit sold due to the associated research and development costs, as well as specialty part production. Lastly today is the VW Thing, or Type 181 as others might know it. The Thing is a civilian reimagining of VW's World War II-era troop transporter, the Kübelwagen. At risk of sounding reductionist, the Thing is essentially a German Jeep. It had stamped steel, was boxy, and had removable doors. The Germans were so innovative that you didn't get real windows either. You got clear plastic pieces that snapped or zipped into place if you didn't want the wind blowing in. The Type 181 was only available in the States for 2 model years, however it has earned itself a cult following. It's not fast, it's fairly loud, but above all, it's quirky and has character. It might not be number 1 on the racetrack, but it is a winner of hearts. So anyway, those are some bizarre vehicles made by otherwise normal manufacturers. If you made it this far, please consider leaving a like, a comment, or maybe even subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.